Renowned Serbian tennis star Novak Djokovic has won his 10th Australian Open crown this past Sunday by beating Stefanos Tsitsipas in 3 sets. The win ties Rafael Nadal's record of 22 Grand Slam singles titles in the 33rd final of his career. You may recall that Djokovic was detained and deported before last year's tournament after the Australian government's decision to cancel his visa due to his unvaccinated status. The 35-year-old Serbian said, "I just felt this huge burden off my back with everything we've been through," adding, "It was a huge relief and a huge release as well." He's still not able to play in the U.S., however. Online users were quick to point out Bill Gates in attendance. How about that? Bill Gates in attendance. Can't believe it. This is a story we've covered here mainly, I think, not for the sports element. Neither you and I are big sports fans. But the fact that he was banned from participating in this tournament in Australia because he was unvaccinated, and still to this day would not be able to come to the U.S. because the U.S., unlike so many of its peer countries, still has the vax requirement if you're coming into this country and you're not a U.S. citizen. Obviously, if you're a U.S. citizen, you can travel back to the U.S. Without being vaccinated. But in Canada, you can just go to Canada even if you're unvaccinated. There's no requirement. There's no requirement, as far as I can tell, in many of our peer European countries. And again, this is an example of the U.S. being this holdout for COVID militant policy. Where are all the people who are always saying, progressives, who are always saying the U.S. should be more like Canada, the U.S. should be more like progressive, countries in Europe, and on so many different policies with vax mandates, with some levels of masking, schools, etc. We were an outlier. We were way more into that stuff than the countries that progressives want us to emulate. Yeah, so I think I'm sold. Let's emulate Canada. Let's emulate some European countries. They seem to have much saner COVID policies, not universally, but in many cases than we do.
First of all, Robby, please don't undersell your Dungeons and Dragons. Surely that constitutes a sport at some level.
Oh, this is going to be stolen valor here.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, the idea of telling a person whose livelihood is in their body, is in their physicality, that they have to put something in it that they're not on board with, it's disgusting. It's so totally inappropriate. And in so many other cases, liberals understand my body, my choice, right? I mean, the right didn't come up with that slogan. I just think it's so inappropriate. And you're right to see us be this outlier among, other, Western countries. It's very surprising and speaks to how firmly the grip of the left is on this COVID policy and how unwilling they are to let go of what have even been mistakes. We have a great piece up at Newsweek today about how, from a member of the scientific community, about how much they got wrong and how crucial it is to admit that at this point in order to reestablish trust with the American people in the scientific community. And there just seems to be so little by way of course correction, so little by way of admitting what they got wrong.
Right. They're not even correcting the policy right now. No one believes that Novak Djokovic being unvaccinated means it's significant that he's a public health risk or something, that you're going to catch COVID from him, because we all know, and the elites and Pfizer and President Biden and Dr. Fauci, everyone agrees that you can get COVID from vaccinated people, that the vaccines itself, they might have some protective effect if they make you less symptomatic, so you'll have a less long duration that you might sneeze on someone and pass it. But they're certainly not holding cases back, and they're not making the claim that they are. So the idea that we need to require vaccination to stop the spread of the cases of the disease is not an argument anyone is making. So you would think after 2 or 3 years, we would bring our policies in line with that understanding that is not in contention, that is not even being debated among policymakers. And the fact that they won't just makes me it reinforces my own libertarianism. Like, the government can't update this policy even now when there's no disagreement on the basic fact that the vaccines are not significantly reducing cases, that you're not putting public health at risk to allow unvaccinated people to come here, and they still haven't changed this policy. Why? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it was so clear how out of step that was. I think from the beginning, I mean, the idea of forcing people to take the vaccine was so un-American, and all of these federal workers who were fired, for refusing, and then in the end were vindicated, right? So I agree with you. There's something very disheartening about how difficult it seems to be for the government to make these corrections. Now, unlike you, I'm not sure it's inherent in government. I think it might be more inherent in the human nature. They don't want to admit they're wrong, because if you start admitting what you were wrong about when it comes to COVID, there's so much you're going to have to take responsibility for. Chief among them, something we talk about a lot on this show, which is the impact it had on poor children, on working class children, on Black and brown children, on their studies, on their futures, learning loss, mental illness, suicide among the young. I mean, the list is really endless, right? I don't know that Djokovic is the person at the top of my list of people who I feel sorry for, but emblematic of the Kafkaesque nature of this policy and its inability to admit the facts, to correct, to follow the science, as they, so piously tell us they're always doing.
Yeah, well, they've just claimed that they know better than us. The CDC, the Biden administration, they're consulting the science and listening to the experts and going through the data. They know things you don't. They're in charge because they're really on top of it, and they've just proven themselves to be so inflexible that's just a myth, that they don't update policies, they don't change their minds about things, even they don't change the policy even when people's minds have changed. It would be I was against many of these policies on sort of principled grounds from the beginning. But now you could be against them on principle and on like reality, on practicality. It doesn't have there's no need for it. That they still won't change it just really makes you feel kind of hopeless about the entire project of American democracy. Other countries have changed things. I know some things have changed. I know that although the travel-related policies are some of the stickiest policies, we haven't updated any of our, as I frequently rail against on the show, we haven't updated our sort of post 9/11 policies with respect to flying in airports in 20 plus years, even though we all know that there's no enhancement to safety for the ridiculous things you have to do to board airplanes. So I guess maybe I shouldn't hold out much hope that COVID policy would be any different on that front, but it is a shame.
And meanwhile, 38 people on the terror watch list, just waltzed right across the southern border last year. So not doing much about that either.
So you're saying I should walk if I'm so upset about having to take off my shoes before I get on a plane. I get you, Batya. I get you. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.